Jeffrey Dahmer Cannibalism, Criminology, and Failures of Justice. In the early hours of July 22, 1991, Milwaukee police responded to a frantic 911 call from Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man who had escaped a small second-floor apartment with handcuffs dangling from his wrist. When officers entered Unit 213, they discovered a house of horrors, severed heads in the refrigerator, preserved body parts in formaldehyde, and tools used for dismemberment. The apartment belonged to Jeffrey Dahmer, a quiet, 31-year-old chocolate factory worker who would soon be revealed as one of America's most notorious serial killers. Today, we explore this case not for sensationalism, but to unpack criminological insights, systemic failures, and the critical ethical boundaries of true crime storytelling. Content warning: this episode discusses violent crime, marginalization, and trauma. Listener discretion is advised. We honor the 17 victims by centering their stories, not the perpetrator's cruelty. Dahmer's killing spree began in June 1978 when he murdered 18-year-old Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker he picked up in Bath, Ohio, shortly after graduating high school. Dahmer lured Hicks to his family's home with promises of beer and music, then bludgeoned him to death with a dumbbell when Hicks tried to leave. He buried Hicks' body in the backyard, later dismembering it and scattering the remains in a nearby wooded area. After a 9-year hiatus, during which he served time for sexual assault of a minor, he resumed killing in 1987, targeting young men mostly from Black, Latino, and Asian communities in Milwaukee. His modus operandi involved luring victims to his apartment with offers of cash, alcohol, or photo shoots, drugging them with sedatives like Halcion, and strangling them. While he preserved body parts, engaged in cannibalism, and attempted to create zombies by drilling into victims' skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid, we omit graphic details to honor the dignity of those who lost their lives. We focus instead on patterns. His targeting of socially isolated, marginalized groups allowed him to operate undetected for years, as their disappearances often received little police attention. Criminologists have long debated Dahmer's motives, weaving together threads of childhood trauma, untreated mental illness, and obsessive-compulsive tendencies. As a child, he was withdrawn and emotionally neglected, with parents who fought bitterly before divorcing when he was 18. He developed a fascination with death early on, dissecting roadkill to study anatomy and preserving animal bones. His struggles with sexuality: he identified as gay but felt deeply ashamed, and social isolation exacerbated his distress. While some frame him as a psychopathic monster, experts argue his case reveals critical gaps in mental health support. He sought treatment for alcoholism repeatedly, but never received care for his violent fantasies, which he later admitted he could not control. Cultural biases also played a role. His early encounters with police, including a 1988 incident where he was found with a drugged minor, were dismissed as domestic disputes or gay drama, allowing him to continue his crimes. We examine how his actions challenge prevailing theories of criminal behavior, questioning whether psychopathy is innate or shaped by systemic neglect, and explore how his case influenced the field of offender profiling. Dahmer's case challenges rigid notions of the born psychopath, highlighting how vulnerability, neglect, and institutional blind spots can interact to produce extreme violence. And it ultimately reshaped offender profiling by underscoring the need to assess hidden compulsions, fantasy life, and systemic context alongside individual responsibility. The case exposed catastrophic institutional failures, most infamously the May 27, 1991, incident involving 14-year-old Laotian boy Konarak Synthesumphone, who had escaped Dahmer's apartment naked, bleeding, and disoriented, was found by neighbors who called police. When officers arrived, Dahmer convinced them the boy was his intoxicated 19-year-old lover, dismissing witnesses' frantic claims that the child was in danger. The officers, influenced by racism and homophobia, viewed the case as a gay domestic issue and ignored the vulnerability of a minor from a refugee community. They returned Synthesumphone to Dahmer, who murdered him hours later and dismembered his body. In the aftermath, more victims were killed before Dahmer's arrest in July 1991. We explore how institutional bias enabled his crimes and the reforms that followed. including mandatory diversity training for law enforcement, enhanced protocols for missing persons in marginalized communities, improved collaboration between police and social services, and the creation of task forces to address hate-based violence. Dahmer's death behind bars did not bring closure to the families of his victims, many of whom have spoken openly about the lasting trauma left by both the crimes and the media frenzy that followed. For them, justice was never solely about punishment, but about acknowledgement of their loved one's humanity, of the warning signs that were missed, and of the systems that failed to intervene. In the years since, victim advocacy has increasingly emphasized survivor-centered approaches, prioritizing long-term support, trauma-informed care, and meaningful inclusion of families in public discourse. His case also reignited urgent conversations around access to mental health care, particularly for individuals exhibiting dangerous ideation but lacking pathways to early intervention. Experts argue that Dahmer's repeated contact with addiction services, law enforcement, and the courts represented missed opportunities to address escalating psychological distress before it became lethal. As a result, some jurisdictions began expanding crisis intervention training and integrating mental health professionals into policing and correctional environments, recognizing that prevention requires more than incarceration after the fact. At the same time, Dahmer's notoriety raised difficult ethical questions about the true crime industry itself. Critics contend that sensationalized portrayals risk transforming perpetrators into cultural icons while reducing victims to footnotes, reinforcing cycles of harm rather than promoting understanding. Survivors and advocates have increasingly called for responsible storytelling, work that resists voyeurism, avoids mythologizing violence, and foregrounds the social conditions that allow such crimes to occur. This shift has prompted some creators and platforms to consult victim families, include educational resources, and contextualize crimes within broader discussions of prevention and accountability. Ultimately, Jeffrey Dahmer's legacy is not defined solely by the enormity of his crimes, but by the reckoning they forced within criminal justice, mental health systems, and the media landscape. His case serves as a sobering reminder that society's response to violence shapes whether tragedy is repeated or prevented, and that telling these stories responsibly means honoring victims, confronting systemic failure, and committing to change rather than spectacle. The Dahmer case is a stark reminder that justice is not only measured by convictions, but by prevention, by the lives that could have been saved if systems had acted sooner and listened more carefully. It challenges us to ask difficult questions about whose pain is taken seriously, whose warnings are believed, and how bias, whether racial, cultural, or institutional, can quietly determine outcomes with irreversible consequences. Protecting vulnerable communities requires more than policy changes on paper. It demands sustained accountability, investment in mental health care, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about how power and prejudice shape responses to violence. Ethical true crime is not about fascination with perpetrators, but about remembrance, responsibility, and reform. It asks us to center victims, to amplify marginalized voices too often dismissed, and to treat these stories not as entertainment, but as opportunities to learn and to prevent future harm. As viewers and participants in these conversations, we also bear responsibility for how we consume these narratives, how we speak about them, and how we advocate for change beyond the screen. We invite you to share your thoughts below with care and empathy, keeping the victims and their families at the center of this discussion.